is one who appears to be having to have extra security since Elon Musk tweets. Do you have sympathy with her?
Well, look, no one can condone any behaviour, words or otherwise, which put an MP's life in danger. You know, I've been there in Westminster and lived through the death of a good friend, David Amos, and Joe Cox. And so, you know, I've been subjected to many death threats myself. I had a stalker for 9 years, which ended up in a court case. But I'm afraid it's part of modern life as a politician that this is what happens. And, you know, there was...
So do you have sympathy or...
So, well, of course I have sympathy, but I'd also question some of the premise around the context in terms of how these threats are happening. You know, there was an announcement just recently that £31 million had been put aside for a number of MPs who actually needed day-to-day protection because they were under what were considered living and serious death threats. They weren't coming from Elon Musk, they were coming from who knows. But I'm afraid part and parcel of politics today and being an MP today, and the fact that we now have social media and widespread use of social media, it has made being a politician a very different choice of career for many women.
Like the leader of the Conservatives, who you're not a massive fan of, it seems, you too want to see a full national inquiry, another one. When did you first realise you wanted that?
On the issue of I'm not a massive fan of, I did back Robert Jenrick for the leadership, and I do support Kemi Badenoch as leader because I want the Conservative Party to succeed in what is an increasingly unstable political environment. I want what is the longest standing and most successful political party to do well. So I want Kemi Badenoch to do well.
When did you first realise you wanted to see a full national inquiry?
So as you know, last time I was on your programme, I'm a victim of child sex abuse myself, but through the Church of England, and I was very aware of, I also sat in a number of committee meetings with the historic child sex abuse because of my own story, which I'd not revealed at the time, but attended a few of those meetings with the Labour MP John Mann, and I was very supportive of that inquiry taking place, particularly when it began to falter. Right. And to make sure that it continued through and it didn't end.
So when did you realise you wanted it?
So probably when the calls first came for one, because I assumed that because I was Secretary of State when the Alex Jones report was first came out, and I believed that the recommendations were being carried out for the report, and indeed I think there were 500 arrests as a result.
Right.
But what I wasn't aware of was that at the time, because the information was concealed, I wasn't aware that the problem was as widespread as it was. I believed it was in Rotherham and Telford and other towns. I wasn't aware that the inquiry hadn't included Oldham. I wasn't aware that the inquiry had excluded a huge number of witnesses who wanted to make statements, including people like Maggie Oliver, who was the police detective turned whistleblower.
But she gave a lot of evidence to the Greater Manchester Wide Review, which was commissioned
by
Andy Burnham,
but she's also somebody who has a huge amount of experience and knowledge
of
what's taken place, and she should have been the first person to have been on the evidence list for a national inquiry, and she wasn't.
Tomorrow the Conservatives will force a vote in Parliament.
So can I also say, Victoria, as well,
briefly,
that the inquiry was much further reaching than just the grooming gangs, and I think a national inquiry on what happened in terms of the grooming gangs and the people who knew.
So why don't the Conservatives do that then?
Well, yeah, that's a good question.
Well, you were in government, so
no,
tell us.
I was Culture Secretary. This didn't even come anywhere near my desk.
No, but you were sat around the cabinet table enough, weren't you?
I can assure you that the entire time I was cabinet, this was never discussed.
Well, so I'm asking you why.
So I can't.
Because there are a number of Conservatives who were in government who are calling for it now.
I can't answer the question, but I think a good person for you to ask that question to would be people like Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, who were Home Secretaries at the time.
I mean, there's no record of you speaking in the chamber specifically about Oldham, Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham, or ever calling for a national inquiry.
So when this was tabled, I did support with John Mann. I did attend a number of you don't have to stand up in the chamber and speak about something to support something. I attended those meetings in Committee Room 14 and others at the time when it was launched, when Theresa May was Prime Minister.
Tomorrow the Conservatives will force a vote in Parliament on holding another fresh national inquiry into the child rape gang scandal. That's despite the Conservatives setting up that 7-year-long £200 million independent inquiry on child sexual abuse. Theresa May, the then Home Secretary, set it up. She set the terms of reference. And then the Conservative government didn't implement any of the 20 recommendations. So isn't calling for another one the very definition of political opportunism?
So do you know what the sad thing is about the sentence is, you know, as a health minister and as culture secretary, I dealt with a number of reports, and quite frequently you find that these inquiries will take place and none of the recommendations are implemented.
And so the same people who didn't implement those recommendations calling for another one, I'm asking you, isn't that the definition of political opportunism?
I think it's a definition of what we need to do to fix how government deals with inquiries and how it deals with recommendations.
To do that.
I think part of the problem is that dealing with recommendations which are usually made by people outside of Westminster, the people who actually put in place those recommendations are civil servants or arm's length bodies or others.
So it's the civil servants' fault?
No, I'm not saying it's their fault at all. What I'm saying is that you're dealing with something which is outside of the normal processes and maybe is unable to be delivered by government or the civil services. And I think it's the processes that take place within government and how government and the civil service function, which makes delivering some of those recommendations almost impossible.
Well, they didn't deliver any of the 20. Nick, the Labour